The views in this podcast are those of the contributors and don't necessarily represent those of CISL, the University of Cambridge or Investec, and should not be taken as advice or a recommendation. Welcome to What Next? Leadership Conversations for a Better Future from the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership in partnership with Investec. This series is hosted by Lindsay Hooper and Mark Kahn.
Hello and welcome to What Next? Leadership Conversations for a Better Future, where we explore how leaders can help build future-fit economies. I'm Lindsay Hooper, Chief Executive at the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership.
And I'm Mark Kahn, Chief Strategy and Sustainability Officer at Investec. Together, we'll bring fresh perspectives, provocative questions, and conversations with leaders who are shaping the future of markets, business, and society.
AI is dominating business strategy, policy debates, and front pages alike. For some, it's the most powerful tool that we've ever invented, a driver of human progress and business productivity. But for others, it's an existential risk. But wherever you stand, one thing's clear: AI is reshaping how we work, lead, and live. So what next for leadership in this new reality? How do we harness AI's potential to accelerate progress and avoid it deepening divides or disruption?
To explore this, we're joined by Dominic Vergine, an innovator, entrepreneur, and sustainability leader who's been working at the intersection of technology and purpose for over 2 decades, and he is a valued member of the innovation community here at Cambridge. Dominic, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Tell us how you came to focus on the AI topic in your journey and how it's formed a particular perspective for you.
I suppose you can't get away from it at the moment, but I have a background in tech startups, but also in sustainability. So I built the sustainability function for ARM, or ARM as some people know it, which is Britain's largest tech company. And I did that for 12 years. And whilst looking at new opportunities for disruption and areas where there really could be big improvements using the latest tech, I came across the opportunity in electric motors and generators. And it's huge, quite different to the sort of normal topics around AI, but the opportunity to improve motors and generators, which are central to decarbonisation. If we want to electrify the planet, most of that goes into, in some way, generators or electric motors. And so as AI grew, it became clearer and clearer that rather than just machine learning, there was an opportunity to use more AI to get the very best results possible out of motors and generators. And just to give you an example of why that's important, a 5% improvement in the efficiency of every motor, or electric motor on the planet, would remove the emissions of France and Germany combined. It's absolutely huge potential, gigatons and gigatons of CO2 that could be removed through improvement of a technology that we all use constantly but don't really think about.
So if I understand correctly, a lot of people think about artificial intelligence in so many different ways, but for you, it is focused quite acutely on energy efficiency in engineering of motors in particular, but then from there more broadly, right?
This is a very important distinction. What we see at the moment in AI, the starting point is large language models. And we started there because there was an enormous pool of seemingly free, it isn't free in fact, but seemingly free data on the internet. And it was a huge amount of data. The more data you have, the more you can train AI in essence. And this is a big problem because actually the quality of the data on the internet isn't that great. You can very quickly find an awful lot of nonsense on the internet. It's also huge. So I read a shocking statistic the other day that OpenAI's energy bills would increase 125 times over the next decade. Now, that's more energy than India. It's just really, really scary how much energy is required for large language models. And all they are actually doing at the end of that is mimicking things humans can do very well themselves. So I really question that. I question that ethically, and I question whether actually there's any value there. And this is something that's coming up a lot at the FT and other media at the moment, is for the companies that have really invested a lot in AI, they are actually struggling to point to the savings and improvements that this has really genuinely made in their business. And I'm sure they will. We're very, very, very early days. However, if you focus AI at quite a specific problem, you can get far further than any team of humans could ever achieve because of its ability to deal with complexity. And you can have a narrow problem, and that doesn't require a lot of energy, but it does allow us to make giant steps in tech or in medicine or in understanding weather patterns and climate change. Where AI really excels is in understanding a level of complexity that is beyond human ability.
I'm interested in how you think this is going to play out, whether you think it's a bubble and we're going to see that bubble burst, or actually this broad brush use in whether it's social media algorithms or broad business productivity tools or a whole range of ways in which it's being deployed. Do you think actually it is going to start delivering returns? We're just early stages. I'm just interested in how you're seeing the wider landscape shifting, because it's certainly not being deployed only in those targeted ways that you've highlighted where the real potential may sit.
I think we'll see a shift. I think it was understandable that we started with large language models, and I think we'll see a shift in the hype towards science. I think it's actually understanding science and bending science to our will more is where we will see the real value. Of course, there'll be value in large language models, but we are very, very early, and people do equate it with the dawn of the internet. I think there are figures around 95% of AI startups will go bust. A lot of them aren't truly AI startups at all, because they're actually relying on other people's software. They're just a thin skin on the top. I think why it is so dominant at the moment is because it will touch every aspect of our lives, and we're really not sure how yet. We're not really sure. Companies themselves are struggling to understand where the real value is, where it can really accelerate things, and we just don't know. Nobody knows, and that's why there's a sense that it's hugely important, but at the same time, what's it really do? Where can it really deliver value?
And just on this, you're very clear about the huge potential in very targeted ways. One read could be actually that's all hype because it's not actually doing very much to accelerate that. There's a lot more talk than reality. It's not actually driving great productivity gains in those companies. So it's not actually accelerating destructive and extractive business models. Or is it? Because that's one of the big concerns we hear in sustainability. The problem isn't the direct energy impacts, and it's not necessarily the targeted uses that provide real solutions. It's just accelerating really damaging business models at scale and putting the foot on the accelerator of an economy that actually needs to transition. So I'm interested in that, whether you think that relies on overblown hype about actually the impact that AI is having in business as usual.
So I think I will have some appalling repercussions in ways that we probably don't fully understand yet. But I think it's important to remember that all we have here, I say all, but it's the most powerful tool by some margin that humans have ever had. And we will use it badly, and we will use it incompetently. As in, we will use it for bad, we will not use it well, and we will use it for good. We will do all three things. The question is, where will the needle lie? It probably lies somewhere in the middle. So it is going to do some horrendous things, and I wouldn't underestimate the energy impact, because a lot of the energy impact will just be from not using it well, for generating kittens dancing videos and things, just pointless things that actually require a huge amount of power that nobody ever even thinks about. So bringing the energy issues to the fore is really important, and whether or not it will balance out overall being more of a positive than a negative depends entirely on how we use it all around the world. And yes, the signs aren't very good right now, but things change.
Can I just come in there somewhat provocatively? Are we not making it a whole lot worse simply because we have a particular behavioral pattern as a species, and the market economy drives things in a particular way. So the energy usage of AI is just going to explode simply because it is deployed into an existing pattern in the market economy, which is short-term profits at one end, and at the other end, the consumer behavior, which is a kind of pointless use of technology without real need, like the kitty videos. So if that's the behavioral pattern from an economic point of view and from a consumer behavior point of view, isn't it no longer a debate? Aren't we absolutely going to blow out whatever energy is available on this and not get anywhere? Because the solution part, which would be to solve for 5% more efficiency in a motor, which AI might help us get there, would pale in significance against just the scale of use for short-term profit combined with useless consumer needs.
It might. I think the one thing that is likely to prevent it is that I'm just not convinced by the current business model of a subscription to one of the AI services, because I'm pretty sure that if people were asked to pay the full cost of the energy, they wouldn't do it. And so I'm not convinced that model can last very long. I think it will probably have to change, because it is completely absurd how, if you're going to write an email and you decide to chat GPT to do it, and then you realise, oh, that's going to cost me £2.50, you wouldn't do it. You'd write the email. And so I question it. I might be wrong about it, but I question whether the model works. And of course, at the moment, all of these companies are propped up by vast amounts of investment. And the other strange thing about that is most of that investment doesn't really go into the company. It goes into buying more servers, buying more data center space. It's not really actually being invested in the company itself, which is pretty unusual. And that's why NVIDIA is so valuable. So I'm not sure whether ultimately that model will change quite significantly and the real value for AI will be found. And then therefore people will be prepared to pay for that. And probably that will stop the frivolity that you see at the moment.
Interesting. So let me see if I get this right. What's going to move us off this negative vector is that the economics of AI will become more contingent on the cost reality of the energy use and knock on to the user. And suddenly the house of cards falls flat.
That's a theory. I think something like that will probably happen. We're all kind of crystal ball gazing here because it hasn't happened yet, but it just doesn't quite make sense. And so I think it will shift. Now, the fact that it shifts and actually the full cost of generating an AI response will probably have to be paid for by a customer, that doesn't mean the customer is going to be using it for anything good. Just because we've moved from one model of frivolous use of AI to a model where actually we're paying for value, it doesn't follow automatically that then things will be used well. But at least it means we won't be completely wasting that energy. So I have no doubt that it will be used badly. It will be used for things that are destructive, that are unsustainable. And I've no doubt it will be used for things that are just messy and pointless. Equally, it will be used for things that are really beneficial. And I suppose one perhaps positive way to think about it is I suspect it will be AI that really helps us move on from the oil-based economy, because we'll have AI helping us looking at new materials, looking at new ways to improve efficiency, looking at helping us improve all aspects of engineering, of flight, of energy generation. It's highly likely that AI will be involved in the final creation of nuclear fusion. So given that, what is oil? It's a $5 trillion a year industry. I can't remember what the value of oil is, but we are trying to transition away from that. And AI is very likely to be central to us doing that. And so surely the companies that are actually managing to achieve parts of that will be worth a very, very, very great deal of money, and probably more than the sort of bot models of AI.
And if you can look at it in a positive sense, the vast amounts that are going into the new energy that's needed to meet demand, much of that is going into renewables. An alternative is not going into new fossil energy growth.
Yeah.
And so that helps to further tilt the economics in favour of transition. So
yes.
There's another potential silver lining there, as long as that isn't all offset just by the huge volume of demand, but that potential to tilt the economics. Also in the crystal ball gazing, I'm hearing, and I think it's very plausible, that like the early years of the internet, not everything survived. Those that actually demonstrate real value, deliver results and get traction and momentum and become the dominant approaches may survive, but it would not be many of the approaches we've got now. But I think there's potentially also a risk of a huge addiction, that people just become hooked on ChatGPT or whatever, and at the point when there are business models in which you have to pay more or be willing to suck up and face advertising in order to get the functionality. Collectively, if we become addicted to a particular service, then our willingness to absorb some of the cost, downsides, pain may be a thing that just become unquestionable. But I'm interested to pivot back to this really targeted positive use, the very significant and powerful potential that you've outlined. I'm interested in whether any of this noise, concern, bigger picture landscape around AI, whether that's getting in the way of the effective targeted use, or whether this is happening anyway, it's just not reaching the headlines. The headlines are all about, job losses or brain rot or whatever. And what's the relationship between the broad narrative and actually what's happening in the spaces that you're in?
So it is very early, and Monumo is just at the point of proving what we can do with customers. And so I think over the next 5 years, the kind of benefits that you can bring by using AI to complex systems like engineering will become clearer and clearer. So the reason that it's not front and centre at the moment, although you do see a lot around AI drug discovery, it's starting to emerge. We're just starting to use AI rather than machine learning. You have to have a lot of data before you can use AI. That data for a lot of these sectors has not existed. It isn't on the internet because it's not books, it's not research papers, it's fundamentally it's maths. And you can use AI to try and write a research paper or do research, but all it's doing then is creating a pastiche. It's looking at what happened before and what might happen next. It is not conducting an experiment. It's not exploring what happens if I play with these 50 parameters simultaneously to find an optimum. You can't do that with the existing data. One of the reasons that you see healthcare before other areas being really impacted is because there is quite a lot of healthcare data. But the type of engineering that we're doing, for example, no company in the world has the data needed because that data was designed for human engineers and not for an AI system. We've designed our data from the start to be designed for an AI system and not for a human engineer. And there's other companies doing similar, but it takes years to build up that data that you can then truly run AI and come up with things that are without human bias and beyond human ability.
I realise that regulation and broad market incentives isn't your space, but you're clearly a player and really thoughtful about the space. So I'm just interested in your view. Do you think, as you've mapped out, market forces will simply shape the future, the combination of tech as it evolves and market forces? Or do you think there actually are interventions, whether it's from the private sector, governments, policymakers, could be taking that would accelerate greater focus of attention and deployment of tech to those targeted positive cases and or away from and putting protections around some of the negatives that you've laid out?
I mean, obviously governments, especially in Europe and the UK as well, and some of the European grants are available to UK companies. They can always help try and push a certain technology or certain area of research a good direction by offering those kinds of grants or tax incentives or things like R&D tax credits, which is something that our company benefits from greatly. And then you can help incentivize small companies through those kinds of grants, and you can point them in the direction of positive use of AI and positive areas of research that have been identified often in academia. So that's one way that policy can help. Whether or not policy should be acting to stop the more negative impacts, I expect it will over time. It's just hard to pinpoint where it needs to be done at the moment. It may be in some way through tax, although I'm not sure how that would work, but it could be actually something like taxing data centers or taxing the companies that are sucking up all the energy and not delivering anything for society, really.
I think that is a very big ask of us as a species, to find our way to cooperate across institutions, governments, and stakeholder groups to somehow organize the use of this new technology in positive ways. And I can hear in your tone that there is some skepticism as to whether that is even possible, but it would be good if we could do it, is what I hear. Let me push it to the third actor in the picture of the negative vector, right? So one would be, as you said, the new technology historically, in terms of us as a species, we tend to use it in good ways, bad ways, and useless ways. And we're probably going to do the same thing with this. And maybe we can organize and regulate, and maybe with some good fortune and cooperation, we can get it a bit more good than bad. Fine. But what about the perspective that AI introduces itself as a thinking party in the world, which has its own capability to exert influence in a way that all previous technology was a tool? This tool can think for itself. Do you ever think about that? Because it's all over everywhere, sort of worries that AI will control us rather than we control them. And then what does that mean? Does that ever come into your perspective?
It doesn't directly affect the work that I'm doing, because we're in total control of what we're doing with the technology and focusing it into engineering. I mean, that may be why I'm not on the social side, because I think it is much easier to look at an area of chemistry or physics or biology and focus on something specific there where you can get a definite result out of it, and where AI can be hugely beneficial. That's much, much easier to navigate than the social issues. So I think on the social side, it will be very, very complex over the next few decades. Whether or not we'll have a thinking AI that emerges, and this is a sort of a belief, actually, strangely, it doesn't think at the moment. Whatever anyone tells, it does not. It copies, it mimics, it creates a pastiche. It does not think. But there's a huge amount of money, possibly more than has ever been invested before, being poured into what is called AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, which is when something will be considered to actually be thinking. We shall see. I'm a skeptic on that, but a lot of technologists, especially in the Bay Area, in the US, they believe that will happen. I am a skeptic.
But let me ask you, why are you a skeptic?
So I should just say that I'm not an engineer. I've been working in technology for my entire career, but I'm not an engineer. But I'm saying that, and I would be very interested to have our Chief Technology Officer join me to answer that question, but I think he'd say the same thing. It's about the way it works. It looks at the data that exists and works out what is likely to come next. So it's quite straightforward to make someone think that it's thinking, but it's not. It's just coming up with what is most likely to come next. So this all becomes very, very philosophical, but how do you prove whether or not it's thinking? So I'm just quite unconvinced that we'll get there anytime soon, because as I understand it, it's not how it works.
Yeah, my concern in relation to the social dimensions are less about it taking over, but more those that are channeling huge funds in, their business models, how those business models work, many of which work on driving end users down into kind of rabbit holes or tunnels, or tend to skew in particular directions. More the risk that what it is predicting comes next has some sense of bias in it, and much of that benefits from conflict and tension. And so I think there's a concern about how it influences the way that we engage as people, and what we get to see, and what we get to see as norms. And do we take as what a machine is telling us should come next as an objective truth, rather than as a sum total of a whole lot of, as you say, what's on the internet? So I think there are real challenges there, but I would from being an absolute layperson, have that skepticism. You talk about some of the positive incentives that governments can take and deploy that would direct action towards positive deployment, such as yours. You've laid out that this is an incredibly powerful new technology that is having to be built and we're having to work it out. I'm interested if that makes it somewhat of a leveler. You sit within the small enterprise relative to those in the Bay Area that are huge global titans. We know much of our work is with big incumbents that are having to transition. I'm interested in whether this powerful new technology enables new enterprises and startups to actually design out some of the scaling issues that we've seen, or whether all of those scaling issues that we face for startups in Europe are still there, how it's shifting that startup incumbent landscape.
It's fascinating because it's so disruptive. So one example at the moment, we have one of the largest and best known engineering companies in the world. I won't say more than that because it will give too much away, but they simply cannot believe what we can do. It's just totally unbelievable. And so they have tested it and validated it and thrown us curveball questions and told us to produce results by the following day, and every single time we can do it. And so it is incredibly disruptive and a huge opportunity. And I am sure that some giant companies that we all think, oh, they couldn't go bust. They will. They will. I don't know which ones, but there will be lots of Kodak moments, when huge companies suddenly vanish because something changes so significantly. Blockbuster. There's going to be quite a lot more in the AI era than there were in the internet era and the era of digital, which is obviously what killed Blockbuster and Kodak. On the other hand, those companies that move forward fast, so the giants that adopt it well and soon, will grow faster. And at the moment, that seems to be more Asian companies than European or US companies adopting it fast. And the laggards will disappear. And of course, some new companies will come to the fore that we haven't even heard of yet as a result. So it's very interesting when we've gone from a tiny pilot with this huge company. We've shown them how much money we can save them and how fast everything is. And so the logical amount you'd put on the next contract is enormous, but it's unlikely to happen. So how long will that take? How long does it take before the real value of AI is understood within some of the biggest and most complex companies in the world? I don't know.
Are you able to give us an example of this amazing value that you were able to demonstrate, which was hard to believe?
Yeah, sure. So we can do in 3 days what it takes most companies 6 to 9 months to achieve. The result is in every respect superior and can achieve up to a 20% cost reduction on where they would have got to in their design. So it's very, very, very fast. It's better in every respect. So it might be lighter, more efficient. It uses fewer rare earths. So that's where we get the cost reduction from, is by using fewer rare earths. So they get a cheaper, better design in a fraction of the time. And we can do it over and over and over again. And the flip side of that, which is not so great, and we haven't talked about yet, is, of course, how that affects jobs.
Yeah.
Now, that's not why I started this company, and I honestly don't know how it will affect jobs in the long term. But clearly, if you've got a system that can do that, you don't need hundreds of engineers doing it. Now, I have a theory about this, which I think a lot of people disagree with, but certainly the Bay Area people will disagree with this. However, if you look at history, every single time there has been a massive technology shift. If you look in the Industrial Revolution, you look at things like the printing press or the loom or the PC in the 60s and 70s, everyone thinks it will cause massive job losses. And what actually happens is it creates huge numbers of jobs that no one had previously thought of. Now, there's a big argument that says that a lot of very well-informed people who say That's not going to happen this time. This time is different. This time it's just going to eat people's jobs. But we've always said that. And we tend to be very arrogant species. So given that every other time in history when we've done this, actually what happens is lots of jobs appear that you just haven't thought of before. Look at all the jobs in IT. If you went into the 1970s and showed people all of these, they wouldn't believe it. So there's a hope that actually, yes, it will be very disruptive. There'll be an enormous shift, but actually it will be a boom and it will create lots of jobs, and we just don't know what they are yet. In terms of how it affects engineering specifically, actually it will require engineers, instead of doing initial designs, it's to refine and improve and target and select those designs to the point where you can try and come up with something that's absolutely the apex design for whatever you're trying to do. And that has huge positive sustainability potential. But it's different to what engineers do today. You certainly would not need quite as many of them, though, I think.
When you add on to that prediction the hope that the efficiencies and design quality that AI would produce for the provision of products and services would reduce the cost to the consumer, reduce the cost of living, which would somehow compensate for the transition of job loss to new jobs. That's the positive view, right? Is that this will reduce the cost of basic products and services for life on the planet, in some cases almost to zero for certain things. If the profit incentive isn't manipulated by companies that prop up prices unnecessarily, I mean, that's also something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly will help reduce cost significantly. And I started off talking about efficiency, and that's why I started the company. But of course, almost all of our customers ask us to reduce cost. Thankfully, in our instance, the way we make it cheaper is by removing as much rare earth material as we can. So it's still got a positive impact. And in some instances, we are able to look at efficiency. We'll soon be getting into energy generation. And then, of course, it's all about efficiency, because efficiency is the bottom line in terms of the electricity companies. So you can directly equate the efficiency to profit.
And certainly some of the pieces that you've highlighted there in rare earths also takes us into the territory of why AI is also such a geopolitical issue as well, and relevant to national resilience and national security, given global competition for finite resources and dominance in the industries of the future and so on. And on the jobs front, clearly it's crystal ball gazing, but great to get that more optimistic perspective. And I suppose what I can see at the moment is there's a lot of pausing, particularly at graduate recruitment level, because companies don't quite know the way things are going to shape out. And rather than betting on huge entry-level headcount, wanting to wait to see actually what kind of capabilities they're going to need. But I think it's clear there will be huge disruption, and that is back into the just transition, because it won't necessarily be the people sitting with jobs at the moment who will have jobs in the future. We know there have been headlines with some of the big consultancies exiting people that they've concluded just don't have the capability to engage with AI, or you were looking to history. If we look at some of the past industrial revolutions or some of the big tech shifts that we've seen, there are a lot of coal miners and coal mining communities in the UK that are still suffering the economic consequences. They didn't go on to get jobs in the new economy. So I think even if we have that positive story, how we as societies and how governments navigate those challenges of seizing the huge gains of a very powerful new tech while balancing those social costs will, I'm sure, be dominating political agendas. You've touched on already a few leadership insights, including for big businesses, and those that harness technology the soonest are more likely to thrive in future. But I'm interested in any other words of advice, things that you would be encouraging leaders to be looking at or thinking about at this point. Many of our audience tend to be within big companies, within big financial institutions, but increasingly in the startup entrepreneurship space. Just interested in what words of advice or any leadership lessons that you'd be sharing at this point.
I think that's a tricky one, because obviously it's so dependent on the specific role or the company. Many companies today, certainly lots of the engineering companies that we talk to, they are still in the mindset of looking at AI from the large language model perspective and from what they've seen in terms of chatbots and how that might impact their business. Now, clearly, in something like accountancy or law, that's pretty clear that there is an existential threat and a change needs to happen and deep understanding, because that is the kind of thing that actually large language models could do very well. But in many companies, the core business, it's not necessarily obvious. And so I think in some of those businesses, they're spending a lot of time and money looking at general sort of chatbot impact to their business, rather than very specifically thinking, what does our business do? How do we make money? And how is AI really going to impact at the heart of whatever our business is? And even in the engineering companies, I'm not seeing that yet, really. And yet that is obviously the main point. And so I suspect that the same is true for many, many, many other companies, where they're again distracted by the hype and what's currently happening and are not really deeply thinking about how it might impact the core business in their sector. So if you're looking at how AI can really affect your core business, really focusing in on how you make money and what your products are, one of the good things from a sustainability perspective is that, generally speaking, what that AI will be able to do is make your product more efficient, make your business more efficient, make it cheaper and better. That's the goal. And usually in doing that, if you're looking at something that has materials, for example, it will use fewer materials and it will use them optimally. It can also optimize for recyclability, for example. So generally speaking, at the minute, the uses of AI to make a product better actually have very significant sustainability benefits. Now, you could flip that and be very pessimistic around it and think that perhaps companies might use it for even greater planned obsolescence. But then there might be a balance in between where there's planned obsolescence, so that company still gets a good throughput of people buying the latest and greatest product, but actually the product has been designed better for recyclability, which then could be quite beneficial to the circular economy and possibly even for that own company to reuse its obsolete products and then repurpose that or recycle that back into the latest product.
So we've looked at the broad landscape. We've heard about the vast potential that you've highlighted in targeted areas. I'm interested if we look at the landscape of sustainability, achieving global goals. And now I'm looking for sources of optimism. Where will AI be part of the solution? And how will it disrupt the ways in which we're approaching sustainability?
One of the things that I looked at when I was at ARM, and I talked to all the big consultancies about this, is how would you use AI to help achieve the Sustainable Development Goals? And one of the things that became very clear whilst I was looking at that is, first of all, nobody had a clue how you go about doing that. It's far, far, far too complex for where AI is today, first of all. We're not there yet. But the interesting thing about it is that it can show how AI could be really beneficial, because when you dig into the global goals, you've got 17 goals and you've got passionate people in each of those goals who are experts in that field. And actually, the delivery of one could have a negative impact on another. In fact, very likely. And in each of those goals, you've got people who would fight tooth and nail for their goal. They're passionate about it. They're trying to do the right thing. So where's an optimum? Because it's not just achieving all the goals, actually, to the max. That doesn't make any sense. How do you optimize across this incredibly complex set of competing objectives, which they are competing objectives? Where's the sweet spot? People cannot do that. Nobody could do that. But maybe in a decade or so, AI can help us do that. Maybe it can actually help us define really effective policies, because goodness only knows we're not very good at it ourselves. So I think there are massive improvements that can be made by using something that doesn't have any human bias and can look at really, really complex data and figure out that's the optimum, that's what we should do. And of course, there will be people who would object violently to it because it doesn't quite achieve what they want, and other people who would be very much for it because it does achieve what they want. But that's human frailty. So there are lots of ways it can be used very positively. And then on a completely different point, but also perhaps positive, surely it's going to change how we teach children, because there will almost be no point in rote learning. And so if you've got an automatic translator and all the things that AI certainly can do, much of it can even do now, how do we teach? What do we teach? All this focus on STEM for the past few decades, well, maybe that wasn't quite right, because the things that AI will be very, very good at are science, technology, engineering, and maths. And it's going to excel at those things way, way, way beyond anything we can do. But that means what we should perhaps do with education is, I think, do what we should always have done and teach people how to think.
Many thanks for joining us, Dominic. From today's conversation, a few messages stand out for me. First, that AI's real value lies not in the hype of chatbots or mass data scraping, but in solving specific complex problems, such as improving efficiency in energy, engineering, and in medicine. And that technology's future impact is going to depend less on what it can do and much more on how we choose to use it, whether we're using it to drive progress or to entrench harm. Of course, market forces and policy will both have roles to play in that, but so too will leadership, asking sharper questions about where AI adds genuine value and how it supports or hinders our ability to accelerate transition to more sustainable economies. That's it for this episode of What Next? Join us next time as we continue exploring what it means to lead in an age of disruption.
This show is presented by Lindsay Hooper, Chief Executive of CISL, and Mark Kahn, Investec's Chief Strategy and Sustainability Officer. The producers are Carl Homer of Cambridge TV and Alexa Selwood. The executive producer is Gillian Secret, and it's produced in partnership with Investec. Thank you for listening. For more episodes, subscribe on any major podcast platform or visit the Leadership Hub on the CISL website or Investec Focus. You'll find the address in the show notes.